Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris in Book 2, Chapter 4. The young doctor returned. He sat down in the smoking room, lighting a cigarette, and Annixter and the drummers pressed around him to know the story of the whole affair. "The man is dead," he declared. "The brakeman. He was shot through the lungs twice. They think the fellow got away with about 5,000 in gold coin." "The fellow? Wasn't there 4 of them?" "No, only one. And say, let me tell you, he had his nerve with him. It seems he was on the roof of the express car all the time. And going as fast as we were, he jumped from the roof of the car down onto the coal on the engine's tender and crawled over that and held up the men in the cab with his gun, took their guns from 'em and made 'em stop the train. Even ordered 'em to use the emergency gear. Seems he knew all about it. Then he went back and uncoupled the express car himself. While he was doing this, a brakeman— you remember that brakeman that came through here once or twice, had a red mustache. That chap? Sure. Well, as soon as the train stopped, this brakeman guessed something was wrong and ran up and saw the fellow cutting off the express car and took a couple of shots at him, and the fireman says the fellow didn't even take his hand off the coupling pin. Just turned around as cool as howdy you'd do and nailed the brakeman. Right there. They weren't 5 feet apart when they began shooting. The brakeman come on him unexpected, had no idea he was so close." "And the express messenger, all this time?" "Well, he did his best, jumped out with his repeating shotgun, but the fellow had him covered before he could turn around. Held him up and took away his gun from him. Say, I call that nerve just the same. One man standing up a whole train load like that. Then, as soon as he cut the express car off, he made the engineer run her up the track about a half mile to a road crossing where he had a horse tied. What do you think of that? Didn't he have it all figured out close? And when he got there, he dynamited the safe and got the Wells Fargo box. He took 5,000 in gold coin. The messenger says it was railroad money that the company was sending down to Bakersfield to pay off with. It was in a bag. He never touched the registered mail, nor a whole wad of greenbacks that were in the safe, but just took the coin, got on his horse, and lit out. The engineer says he went to the eastern." "He got away, did he?" "Yeah, but they think they'll get him. He wore a kind of mask, but the brakeman recognized him positively. He got his ante-mortem statement. The brakeman said the fellow had a grudge against the road. He was a discharged employee and lives near Bonneville." "Dyke! By the Lord!" exclaimed Annixter. "That's the name," said the young doctor. When the train arrived at Bonneville 40 minutes behind time, it landed Annixter and Hilma in the midst of the very thing they most wished to avoid, an enormous crowd. The news that the Overland had been held up 30 miles south of Fresno, a brakeman killed, and the safe looted, and that Dyke alone was responsible for the night's work, had been wired on ahead from Fowler, the train conductor, throwing the dispatch to the station agent from the flying train. Before the train had come to a standstill under the arched roof of the Bonneville depot, it was all but taken by assault. Annixter, with Hilma on his arm, had almost to fight his way out of the car. The depot was black with people. S. Behrman was there, Delaney, Cyrus Ruggles, the town marshal, the mayor, Genslinger, his hat on the back of his head, ranged from the train from cab to rear lights, notebook in hand, interviewing, questioning, collecting facts for his extra. As Annixter descended finally to the platform, the editor, alert as a black and tan terrier, his thin, osseous hands quivering with eagerness, his brown, dry face working with excitement, caught his elbow. "Can I have your version of the affair, Mr. Annixter?" Annixter turned on him abruptly. "Yes," he exclaimed fiercely. "You and your gang drove Dyke from his job because he wouldn't work for starvation wages. Then you raised freight rates on him and robbed him of all he had. You ruined him and drove him to fill himself up with Carraher's whiskey. He's only taken back what you plundered him of, and now you're gonna hound him over the state, hunt him down like a wild animal, and bring him to the gallows at San Quentin. That's my version of the affair, Mr. Genslinger, but it's worth your subsidy from the P&SW to print it." There was a murmur of approval from the crowd that stood around, and Genslinger, with an angry shrug of one shoulder, took himself away. At length, Annixter brought Hilma through the crowd to where young Vaca was waiting with the team. However, they could not at once start for the ranch, Annixter wishing to ask some questions at the freight office about a final consignment of chairs. It was nearly 11 o'clock before they could start home. But to gain the upper road to Quien Sabe it was necessary to traverse all the main street, running through the heart of Bonneville. The entire town seemed to be upon the sidewalks. By now the rain was over and the sun shining. The story of the hold-up, the work of a man whom everyone knew and liked, was in every mouth. How had Dyke come to do it? Who would have believed it of him? Think of his poor mother and the little Tad. Well, after all, he was not so much to blame. The railroad people had brought it on themselves. But he had shot a man to death. Ah, that was serious business. Good-natured, big, broad-shouldered, jovial Dyke, the man they knew, with whom they had shaken hands only yesterday. Yes, and drank with him. He had shot a man, killed him, had stood there in the dark and in the rain while they were asleep in their beds, and had killed a man. Now where was he? Instinctively, eyes were turned eastward over the tops of the houses, or down vistas of side streets, to where the foothills of the mountains rose dim and vast over the edge of the valley. He was in amongst them somewhere, in all that pile of blue crests and purple canyons he was hidden away. Now, for weeks of searching, false alarms, clues, trailings, watchings, all the thrill and heart-bursting excitement of a manhunt. Would he get away? Hardly a man on the sidewalks of that town that day who did not hope for it. As Annixter's team trotted through the central portion of the town, young Vaca pointed to a denser and larger crowd around the rear entrance of the city hall. Fully 20 saddle horses were tied to the iron rail underneath the scant, half-grown trees nearby, and as Annixter and Hilma drove by, the crowd parted, and a dozen men with revolvers on their hips pushed their way to the curbstone and, mounting their horses, rode away at a gallop. "It's the posse," said young Vaca. Outside the town limits, the ground was level. There was nothing to obstruct the view, and to the north, in the direction of Osterman's ranch, Vaca made out another party of horsemen galloping eastward, and beyond these still another. "Now, there are the other posses," he announced. "That further one is Archie Moore's. He's the sheriff. He came down from Visalia on a special engine this morning." When the team turned into the driveway of the ranch house, Hilma uttered a little cry, clasping her hands joyfully. The house was one glitter of new white paint. The driveway had been freshly graveled, the flower beds replenished. Mrs. Vaca and her daughter, who had been busy putting on the finishing touches, came to the door to welcome them. "What's this case here?" asked Annixter, when, after helping his wife from the carryall, his eye fell upon a wooden box of some 3 by 5 feet that stood on the porch and bore the red Wells Fargo label. "It came here last night, addressed to you, sir," exclaimed Mrs. Vaca. "We weren't sure it wasn't any of your furniture, so we didn't open it." "Oh, maybe it's a wedding present," exclaimed Hilma, her eyes sparkling. "Well, maybe it is," returned her husband. "Here, my son, help me in with this." Annixter and young Vaca bore the case into the sitting room of the house, and Annixter, hammer in hand, attacked it vigorously. Vaca discreetly withdrew on signal from his mother, closing the door after him. Annixter and his wife were left alone. "Oh, hurry, hurry," cried Hilma, dancing around him. "I want to see what it is. Who do you suppose could have sent it to us? And so heavy, too. What do you think it can be?" Annixter put the claw of the hammer underneath the edge of the board top and wrenched with all his might. The boards had been clamped together by a transverse bar, and the whole top of the box came away in one piece. A layer of excelsior was disclosed, and on it a letter addressed by typewriter to Annixter. It bore the trademark of a business firm of Los Angeles. Annixter glanced at this and promptly caught it up before Hilma could see, with an exclamation of intelligence. "Oh, I know what this is," he observed, carelessly trying to restrain her busy hands. "It isn't anything, just some machinery. Let it go." But already she had pulled away the excelsior. Underneath, in temporary racks, were 24 Winchester repeating rifles. What? Murmured Hilma blankly. "Well, I told you not to mind," said Annixter. "It isn't anything. Let's look through the rooms." "But you said you knew what it was," she protested, bewildered. You wanted to make believe it was machinery. Are you keeping anything from me? Tell me what it all means. Oh, why are you getting these?" She caught his arm, looking with intense eagerness into his face. She half understood already. Annixter saw that. "Well," he said lamely, "you know, it may not come to anything at all, but you know, well, this league of ours, suppose the railroad tries to jump King Sabe or Los Muertos or any of the other ranches. We made up our minds, the leaguers have, that we wouldn't let it. That's all." "And I thought," cried Hilma, drawing back fearfully from the case of rifles, "and I thought it was a wedding present." And that was their homecoming, the end of their bridal trip. Through the terror of the night, echoing with pistol shots, through that scene of robbery and murder, into this atmosphere of alarms, a manhunt organizing, armed horsemen silhouetted against the horizons, cases of rifles where wedding presents should have been. Annixter brought his young wife to be mistress of a home he might at any moment be called upon to defend with his life. The days passed. Soon a week had gone by. Magnus de Eric and Osterman returned from the city without any definite idea as to the corporation's plans. Lyman had been reticent. He knew nothing as to the progress of the land cases in Washington. There was no news. The executive committee of the League held a perfunctory meeting at Los Muertos at which nothing but routine business was transacted. A scheme put forward by Osterman for a conference with the railroad managers fell through because of the refusal of the company to treat with the ranchers upon any other basis than that of the new grading. It was impossible to learn whether or not the company considered Los Muertos, King Sabe, and the other ranches around Bonneville covered by the test cases then on appeal. Meanwhile, there was no decrease in the excitement that Ike's holdup had set loose over all the county. Day after day, it was the one topic of conversation at street corners, at crossroads, over dinner tables, in office, bank, and store. S. Behrman placarded the town with a notice of $500 reward for the ex-engineer's capture, dead or alive, and the express company supplemented this by another offer of an equal amount. The country was thick with parties of horsemen armed with rifles and revolvers, recruited from Visalia, Goshen, and the few railroad sympathizers around Bonneville and Guadalajara. One after another of these returned, empty-handed, covered with dust and mud, their horses exhausted, to be met and passed by fresh posses starting out to continue the pursuit. The sheriff of Santa Clara County sent down his bloodhounds from San Jose, small, harmless-looking dogs with a terrific bay to help in the chase. Reporters from the San Francisco papers appeared, interviewing everyone, sometimes even accompanying the searching bands. Horse hoofs clattered over the roads at night. Bells were rung. The Mercury issued extra after extra. The bloodhounds bayed. Gun butts clashed on the asphalt pavements of Bonneville. Accidental discharges of revolvers brought the whole town into the street. Farmhands called to each other across the fences of ranch divisions. In a word, the countryside was in an uproar. And all to no effect. The hoof marks of Ike's horse had been traced in the mud of the road to within a quarter of a mile of the foothills, and there irretrievably lost. 3 days after the hold-up, a sheep herder was found who had seen the highwayman on a ridge in the higher mountains to the northeast of Tarusa, and that was absolutely all. Rumors were thick, promising clues were discovered, new trails taken up, but nothing transpired to bring the pursuers and pursued any closer together. Then, after 10 days of strain, public interest began to flag. It was believed that Ike had succeeded in getting away. If this was true, he had gone to the southward after gaining the mountains, and it would be his intention to work out of the range somewhere near the southern part of the San Joaquin, near Bakersfield. Thus the sheriffs, marshals, and deputies decided. They had hunted too many criminals in these mountains before not to know the usual courses taken. In time, Ike must come out of the mountains to get water and provisions. But this time passed, and from not one of the watched points came any word of his appearance. At last the posses began to disband. Little by little the pursuit was given up. Only S. Behrman persisted. He had made his mind to bring Ike in. He succeeded in arousing the same degree of determination in Delaney, by now a trusted aide of the railroad and of his own cousin, a real estate broker named Christian, who knew the mountains and had once been marshal of Visalia in the old stock-raising days. These two went into the Sierras, accompanied by 2 hired deputies, and carrying with them a month's provisions and 2 of the bloodhounds loaned by the Santa Clara sheriff. On a certain Sunday, a few days after the departure of Christian and Delaney, Annixter, who had been reading David Copperfield in his hammock on the porch of the ranch house, put down the book and went to find Hilma, who was helping Louisa Vaca set the table for dinner. He found her in the dining room, her hands full of the gold-bordered china plates, only used on special occasions, and which Louisa was forbidden to touch. His wife was more than ordinarily pretty that day. She wore a dress of flowered organdy over pink sateen, with pink ribbons of outer waist and neck, and on her slim feet the low shoes she always affected, with their smart, bright buckles. Her thick, brown, sweet-smelling hair was heaped high upon her head and set off with a bow of black velvet, and underneath the shadow of its coils, her wide-open eyes, rimmed with the thin black line of her lashes, shone continually, reflecting the sunlight. Marriage had only accentuated the beautiful maturity of Hilma's figure, now no longer precocious, defining the single deep swell from her throat to her waist, the strong, fine amplitude of her hips, the sweet feminine undulation of her neck and shoulders. Her cheeks were pink with health, and her large round arms carried the piled-up dishes with never a tremor. Annixter, observant enough where his wife was concerned, noted how the reflection of the white china set a glow of pale light underneath her chin. "Hilma," he said, "I've been wondering lately about things. We're so blamed happy ourselves, it won't do for us to forget about other people who are down, will it? Might change our luck, and I'm just lively to forget that way, too. It's my nature." His wife looked up at him joyfully. Here was the new Annixter, certainly. "In all this hullabaloo about Dyke," he went on, "there's someone nobody ain't thought about at all. That's Mrs. Dyke and the little Tad. I wouldn't be surprised if they were in a hole over there. What do you say we drive over to the Hopper Ranch after dinner and see if she wants anything?" Hilma put down the plates and came around the table and kissed him without a word. As soon as their dinner was over, Annixter had the carryall hitched up, and dispensing with young vodka, drove over to the Hopper Ranch with Hilma. Hilma could not keep back the tears as they passed through the lamentable desolation of the withered brown vines, symbols of perished hopes and abandoned effort, and Annixter swore between his teeth. Though the wheels of the carryall grated loudly on the roadway in front of the house, nobody came to the door nor looked from the windows. The place seemed tenantless, infinitely lonely, infinitely sad. Annixter tied the team and with Hilma approached the wide-open door, scuffling and tramping on the porch to attract attention. Nobody stirred. A Sunday stillness pervaded the place. Outside, the withered hop leaves rustled like dry paper in the breeze. The quiet was ominous. They peered into the front room from the doorway, Hilma holding her husband's hand. Mrs. Dyke was there. She sat at the table in the middle of the room, her head with its white hair down upon her arm. A clutter of unwashed dishes were strewn over the red and white tablecloth. The unkempt room, once a marvel of neatness, had not been cleaned for days. Newspapers, Genslinger's extras, and copies of San Francisco and Los Angeles dailies were scattered all over the room. On the table itself were crumpled yellow telegrams, a dozen of them, a score of them, blowing about in the draught from the door. And in the midst of all this disarray, surrounded by the published accounts of her son's crime, the telegraphed answers to her pitiful appeals for tidings fluttering about her head, the highwayman's mother, worn out, abandoned, and forgotten, slept through the stillness of the Sunday afternoon. Neither Hilma nor Annixter ever forgot their interview with Mrs. Dyke that day. Suddenly waking, she had caught sight of Annixter, and at once exclaimed eagerly, "Is there any news?" For a long time afterwards, nothing could be got from her. She was numb to all other issues than the one question of Dyke's capture. She did not answer their questions nor reply to their offers of assistance. Hilma and Annixter conferred together without lowering their voices at her very elbow while she looked vacantly at the floor, drawing one hand over the other in a persistent, maniacal gesture. From time to time she would start suddenly from her chair, her eyes wide, and as if all at once realizing Annixter's presence, she would cry out, "Is there any news?" Where is Sydney, Mrs. Dyke?" asked Hilma for the fourth time. "Is she well? Is she taken care of?" "Here's the last telegram," said Mrs. Dyke in a loud, monotonous voice. "See, it says there's no news." "He didn't do it," she moaned, rocking herself back and forth, drawing one hand over the other. "He didn't do it. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. I don't know where he is." When at last she came to herself, it was with a flood of tears. Hilma put her arms around the poor old woman as she bowed herself again upon the table, sobbing and weeping. "Oh, my son," she cried. "My own boy, my only son. If I could have died for you to have prevented this. I remember him when he was little, such a splendid little fellow, so brave, so loving, with never an unkind thought, never a mean action. And so it was all his life. We were never apart. It was always dear little son and dear mammy between us. Never once was he unkind, and he loved me and was the gentlest son to me, and he was a good man. He is now. They don't understand him. They're not even sure that he did this. He never meant it. They don't know my son. Why, he wouldn't have hurt a kitten. Everybody loved him. He was driven to it. They hounded him down. They wouldn't let him alone. He was not right in his mind. They hounded him to it." She cried fiercely. "They hounded him to it. They drove him and goaded him till he couldn't stand it any longer. And now they mean to kill him for turning on them. They're hunting them with dogs night after night. I've stood on the porch and heard the dogs baying far off. They're tracking my boy with dogs like a wild animal. May God never forgive them." She rose to her feet, terrible, her white hair unbound. "May God punish them as they deserve. May they never prosper. On my knees I shall pray for it every night. May their money be a curse to them. May their sons, their firstborn, only sons, be taken from them in their youth." But Hilma interrupted, begging her to be silent, to be quiet. The tears came again, and then the choking sobs. Hilma took her in her arms. "Oh, my little boy," she cried. "My only son, all that I had, to have come to this. He was not right in his mind, or he would have known it would truly break my heart. Oh, my son, if I could have died for you." Sydney came in, clinging to her dress, weeping, imploring her not to cry, protesting that they never could catch her papa, that he would come back soon. Hilma took them both, the little child and the broken-down woman, in the great embrace of her strong arms, and they all three sobbed together. Annixter stood on the porch outside, his back turned, looking straight before him into the wilderness of dead vines, his teeth shut hard, his lower lip thrust out. "I hope S. Behrman is satisfied with all this," he muttered. "I hope he is satisfied now, damn his soul." All at once an idea occurred to him. He turned about and re-entered the room. "Mrs. Dyke," he began, I want you and Sydney to come over and live at Keen's Ave. I know, you can't make me believe that the reporters and officers and officious busy faces that pretend to offer help just so they can satisfy their curiosity are nagging you to death. I want you to let me take care of you and the little tad till all this trouble of yours is over with. There's plenty of place for you. You can have the house my wife's people used to live in. You've got to look these things in the face. What are you going to do to get along? You must be very short of money. S. Behrman will foreclose on you and take the whole place in a little while now. I want you to let me help you. Let Hilma and me be good friends to you. It would be a privilege." Mrs. Dyke tried bravely to assume her pride, insisting that she could manage, but her spirit was broken. The whole affair ended unexpectedly, with Annixter and Hilma bringing Dyke's mother and little girl back to King Sabe in the carryall. Mrs. Dyke would not take with her a stick of furniture nor a single ornament. It would only serve to remind her of a vanished happiness. She packed a few clothes of her own and Sidney's in a little trunk, Hilma helping her, and Annixter stowed the trunk under the carryall's back seat. Mrs. Dyke turned the key in the door of the house, and Annixter helped her to her seat beside his wife. They drove through the sere brown hop vines. At the angle of the road, Mrs. Dyke turned around and looked back at the ruin of the hopper edge, the roof of the house just showing above the trees. She never saw it again. As soon as Annixter and Hilma were alone after their return to King Sabe, Mrs. Dyke and Sidney having been installed in the tree's old house, Hilma threw her arms around her husband's neck. "Fine," she exclaimed. "Oh, it was fine of you, dear, to think of them, and to be so good of them. My husband is such a good man, so unselfish. You wouldn't have thought of being kind to Mrs. Dyke and Sidney a little while ago. You wouldn't have thought of them at all, but you did now, and it's just because you love me true, isn't it? Isn't it? And because it's made you a better man, I'm so proud and glad to think it's so. It is so, isn't it? Just because you love me true." "You bet it is, Hilma," he told her.